Well, welcome back to the A Stroll Through the Library podcast. We're so happy that you're here with us listening to this podcast today. I have got somebody on that I am super excited to talk with. We were just talking before the recording and we had to think through how did we start talking in the first place. And it was the internet, as with many of my guests. It was somebody that I met online. This is Tyler Gorsline. He is the lead pastor of A Seattle Church, which is the name of the church. I think it's a pretty awesome name. It's not just a church in Seattle. It is A Seattle Church. He is also the host of the podcast, But I Tell You, which, by the way, if you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, check that out. We'll talk about it through this episode as well. But I'm excited to have a chat with you. Thanks for being here, man. Yeah, of course. Well, we're going to jump into some of these book questions. I know I was sharing before the recording, but books are kind of my love language. It's been the thing that I've enjoyed in ministry, is getting to have time to read and spend time in books. And so the whole heart of this podcast, as I've said a few times, has been, how is it that basically what are the things that the people that I'm listening to are reading? What are those stories that shape the people that have shaped me and my ministry? And Tyler is one of those people from afar out in Seattle to Kansas, where I'm at now. But somebody who shaped me and in the things that he shares. And so the first question I got for you might not be as theological as the rest, but the first one I got for you, when you think back to your earliest memories of reading, did you like reading as a kid? I think it's always interesting because I didn't. I came into that later. But what was the first book that you really remember getting into?
It's such a great question. I didn't grow up in the faith, and so I came to follow Jesus through young life right before I turned 18. And so, my acquaintance with reading, it's funny, like I was always a decent student, but I like really didn't have like much for theological reading growing up. I didn't like read the Bible with my
Sure.
family, anything like that. So it really made me think. I was like, what were some of the books that kind of spoke to me? And it's funny, it's like imaginative fiction stuff like James and the Giant Peach. I remember as a kid, I remember
Yeah.
this book called The Key, which was about like an island and someone lost on it. And then I was thinking like, what book do I still have?
Yeah.
I brought this book with me. So it's called The Brothers K, and it's not the Brothers Karamazov, but it's like,
Okay.
basically it's about a small town. And they had me read it. It's actually in high school. It's actually about the town that I grew up in.
Oh,
And so
nice.
it's called Camas, Washington. And they, it's like this person makes this trip to Seattle for their college years. And it's like post Vietnam. And I remember like being so caught up in it. But the irony is I'm not a great fiction reader at this point. So I kind of like traded in my only reading of fiction for what is often my only reading of nonfiction since
Yep.
I started
Yep.
following Jesus. And I aspire to be one of those pastors who says like I read fiction more, but
Sure. No, I appreciate it. And yeah, no, I legitimately, I've been so jealous of people who are like really into fiction as pastors, because I'm like, man, I haven't had the time, and I think that's a me problem. It's usually I've got to fix my my rhythms, find my Sabbath, all of that. But in reality, I'm like, man, reading fiction just feels like it would be too much fun, and I'm supposed to be working when I'm reading, has been my internal dialogue. And so this past year I've finally gotten back into fiction, finally starting to enjoy it. But I still aspire to be one of those guys one day when I talk to Josh Porter and he's going through like some strange clown fiction book thing. I'm like, man, I wish I had that, because I want to read that and see what you're talking about. But I just don't have that time in my mind. I just spend it scrolling on Instagram, and that's probably not any better. But that's a whole different conversation.
I hear it. I hear you. I heard someone recently say that um it's almost like if nonfiction low or raises your floor, fiction raises your ceiling.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
as a communicator, like I really want to believe that, but I also have this like utilitarian parent of 3 kids under the age of 11 trying to do ministry and feeling like, my habits are that I needed to read that book yesterday, that nonfiction book, because I needed to know that yesterday. And so it's hard to embrace those first 50 pages of something
Yeah.
that like, I'm like, where's this even going? I don't know. I want to be that fiction reader, but I have to get past the part of me that has 10 books I was supposed to already read or I want to know. And I'll watch a movie, but it feels like a little bit more work to read fiction. But I think I'll get there. I'm pretty confident I can get there.
No, for sure. I think you got it. But yeah, my wife reads fiction all the time. When we first got married, I don't think I've shared this on the show yet, but when we first got married, she was talking with me, and I asked, like, how many books have you read? Like, what were your favorite books when you were younger? And she was like, like, I think I've read like 5 books in my whole life, like up to the point of us getting married. And we got married young, but still, like, it's like only 5 ever. Like, you didn't read them for school? Like, what do you mean? And she has now completely surpassed me, where like I go on Goodreads and I'm like, oh, I can't catch up to how many my wife is reading, because she's like 40 ahead of me every year. But she can do it. I just have not found that ability quite yet. I'm trying to work that one out. But yeah, when it comes to like childhood side of things, you said you grew up in Washington. But one of the things I was wondering was just kind of like, as you think back to those books, those stories, a lot of people have shared like fiction, especially as a kid, is this good place to kind of find solace, or like kind of an escape from things. It doesn't necessarily mean that childhood's bad or anything, but just kind of what was going on in your life at that point in time as you're reading those books.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think that very much hits it. I mean, it's not a surprise that many of us in helping professions, needed help or wanted help.
Amen.
I come from a broken home, grew up actually, some of the first reading I heard was in AA meetings. I'd go with my dad. And
Yeah.
so I'd sit in this basement in Anchorage, Alaska, where my dad still lived after we moved, and would hear them read from the 12 steps and different things like that. And I think with all the tumult and chaos that kind of experienced with broken home and, big, huge family, blended family, you know, there was some escape there, I think, which is part of it. I think I'm also wired by God as a relator. So, like, I'm highly relational, whether it's how I teach, whether it's how I connect, it's like I'm a relationships person very much. And I think context is part of that. So, even when I read that book, I mentioned the Brothers K, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading about the history of a place that I am, so I can connect
Yeah.
to it and feel a little bit more rooted. And it's just funny to see how those stories play out in, how I live with Jesus and with other people and pastoral ministry and as a learner, like, I think I'm always looking for the connection and the relation to the material. And, how does it not just speak to me, but how does it speak to something?
No, no, absolutely. And do you think like, so you grew up in Washington, some in Alaska? That's got to be 2 different places. I don't know. I've never been to to Alaska, but it sounds like 2 pretty different circumstances. So what was that like?
Yeah, simply, my mom's a flight attendant, so I
Okay,
had the privilege of getting to fly and visit my dad quite a bit, throughout my childhood, probably annually at least. And, um, but yes, it was, I tell my kids stories about the great wild of even Anchorage, Alaska. They love
for
those
sure.
stories
Yeah.
because,
Oh
when you have
yeah.
moose in your front yard and, big snow that's as tall as your house and, those stories really elicit imagination from them. But then growing up in the Portland, Vancouver, Washington area, so on the Washington side, but near Portland, yeah, it's just, very much kind of you have to go where your imagination leads you and who your relationships connect you to. And thankfully, I mean, Young Life, it was the people that were my leaders who introduced me to Jesus who really helped me to capture a desire for reading and a desire for learning. I kind of had this hunger for figuring out how to live into this newfound faith that I got. And so they were, always reading something or always pointing me to something. And it just kind of became part of my discipleship that you read and learn not just the Bible, but from these people who seem to have a grasp on how to live with Jesus. And so, that quickly became a hunger that I had.
No, for sure. No, that's awesome. I One of the things that, and I don't have this in the notes or anything, but one of the things that's so interesting to me is so I grew up on the East Coast. I say Baltimore because it's the only thing that anyone knows in Maryland. But closer to, I grew up very close to the Gettysburg battlefields, right on the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. And so like I had that connection with like reading stories of Civil War was very interesting because you're like, oh, I can go look at where this happened. Like I'm there on the weekend or whatever else. And so I totally get that. But one of the interesting things being on the East Coast and then spending a little bit of time in Utah and now being here in the Midwest has been the fact that like Seattle, Portland area, there are so many incredible podcasters, thinkers, writers. Like it's insane the wealth of awesome stuff that you guys have going on out there. I had a friend the other day who was like, how come like half of your podcast guests have been from the Pacific Northwest? And I was like, because that's like the place right now. Like it really is.
Where's the spot?
um
Because the West Coast,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
us.
Exactly. I'll give it to you. But I'm interested in your take on it because my thought from not being in that side of things is I've kind of just assumed that there's like with the cultural pushback and then obviously big church that existed with Mars Hill, not trying to get into all that, but that had its fallout and everything. There's so much that I think honestly is pretty fertile soil because of all the turmoil that's happened there. There's been a tilling of things over the last 20 years or so. So I was just kind of interested, is that something that you feel out there that you would agree with that or have a different
Man,
take?
I could literally take this the whole rest of the way because I'm deeply passionate about this topic. But I think a couple things like um, I think Tyson quotes this kind of early 20th century writer, minister. I just dropped his name, I forget it, but basically the kind of God goes where he's wanted sort of thing. And I think this is really contested space for whatever reason.
Sure.
There is in Seattle and Portland both wild spiritual heritage of like beautiful things where even the non indigenous founders of Seattle, the Denny family, they came and arrived and met Chief Sealth, who's the Seattle chief. It's where Seattle gets its name.
Okay.
And they said, "We come in the name of Jesus." And he said, "I know who you're talking about." And they're like, "What?" And basically, he had had a vision of Jesus before
Wow.
they'd ever kind of heard the classic missionary take. And there's all these beautiful things about these places, ingenuity that far surpasses our size, this kind of fighter spirit of figuring it out. And then there's the kind of spiritual stuff on the backside of that that can be like a spirit of usury or greed or individualism or, some really illicit stuff. Like I think there's more strip clubs in Portland than anywhere in America. Like there's some of
Wow.
this stuff that is really broken that is kind of the ways that the evil one has, I think, attached to those things. So not to get too wild in it, but I think
Oh, no.
the beauty there and why what I'm trying to say is I believe that you have to be committed to following Jesus because you will never do it by accident out here. Like there's no cultural benefit
Yeah.
to being a cultural Christian in Seattle or Portland or the PNW. It's just like, why would you do that? There's so much other fun stuff to do. You can hike, you can, do you can make a lot of money, you can kind of, do whatever. You can
Sure. Sure.
be your utopian reality. However, um, there's this real need, felt need for Jesus out here, whether it's battles with depression or anxiety or some of these things. And the people I know who follow Jesus are serious about it, which is awesome.
Absolutely. No, I was just interested. Thank you. Yeah. No, because like growing up, the church that I was first working at, one of my first church jobs, was very integrated into the Mars Hill side of things. And so when that collapsed, I was like, hey, I'm a young pastor who's got tattoos. I'm going to move to Portland. I'm going to move to Seattle. I'm going to go help with all
Yes.
of that. And God had a different plan. I won't say it could never happen, but at the moment, has not happened. That's for sure. And we ended up in Utah. And I was like, God, honestly, like, what are you doing, man? Like, you put me in Utah. This is like the most opposite, the most religious place on the face of the planet. And it was interesting for me because like I said, I worked out there for 5.5 years. We loved it. We still love Utah. I was back there and preached, I guess 3 months ago, something like that. Some of our closest friends are there, but it was interesting because I got there and realized that there was so much religious culture, but similarly, total flip side, but similarly, so you weren't going to follow Jesus by following the culture. The culture was very religious, very worker focused, very anything to fill every moment of your time and show your neighbor that you have more than them. But there was no like accidental Christians in the state of Utah. Like that doesn't happen. And so it was kind of cool. And then again, when we moved out here a year and a half ago, I was like, okay, Kansas, God, I really have no idea what you're doing leading in this direction because, like, this is Christian, like, this is Bible Belt Central, right? We went to Walmart and everybody's got the Chosen t-shirts on, and I was like, man, they've got like a fan club out here. Like, what is this? And quickly I've realized like there's a lot of I'm in Newton, Kansas. There's a lot of disenfranchised second, third generation unchurched people, and there's still a plan there. God's got something working. But I've always been interested because I think you guys are a good bit ahead of us out on the coast in like the cultural temperature side of things, and that's just always interested me. I love one day I'll get out there and check it out, but it's
You're
cool.
always
I
welcome. We'd love to have
appreciate it.
you, and we joke that, couple things. One, our church planted and helping to serve folks coming out of the Mars Hill thing, and it wasn't
Mm.
a strategic plan. It just so happened
Yeah,
that, like,
yeah,
via relationship, we had similar kind of folks who had been connected there, and um, so that is a real thing. And I think about what my friend Katya Adams once shared with me, which was like the weird irony is Peter, who, flunked out of Jewish school, rabbinic school, got called to the Jews. And then, on the same Paul, who's an expert in law, got called to the Gentiles.
yep.
And I think that God in his loving kindness, um, is always calling us beyond our capacity. And so I think it makes sense
Absolutely.
why you're in Utah or Kansas, and why I'm in transient downtown Seattle as a deeply rooted local pastor person. I'm in a neighborhood that turns over, every couple years. And so
For sure, yeah.
it's pretty cool to have to rely on Jesus in that way.
No, no, it's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I've respected about you from following over the internet is the fact that you've been there for that time. It's not like, hey, the cool place to be is Seattle, because admittedly, it's a cool place to be. The coffee's good, tattoos are cool. I get it, I get it. I like shoes. You guys aren't far from Nike. That's pretty awesome. But with that being said, like you're there and dedicated to it, and I appreciate that even from over here. So thank you for doing that. So one of the book questions, getting back into that side of things that I had for you, is there one book or maybe even a couple that you just keep returning to over and over again? I think some people are rereaders, not everybody. But is there something that you keep coming back to, maybe reading in different new ways?
Yeah, I don't know if any of your other guests do this, but I like brought my books with me.
Yeah,
I
if
was
you
like,
have, and I
"Find one of those."
appreciate it. Yeah,
So
yeah, yes,
the tricky part is Henry Nouwen's probably my Henri, as his name would be properly said. It's probably one of my favorite authors, and
absolutely.
I have two of his books in light of the questions you
Yes.
sent. And In the Name of Jesus is one of those books that I think I read it first in the first couple years of my walk with Jesus, but I don't think it quite registered to me. For those who like don't know what it talks about kind of the different temptations that Jesus experienced in his 40 days in the wilderness, and Henry like has this capacity to speak right to the soul and right to those temptations that you don't think you
Amen.
have, but then you realize as you mature in your faith, like, oh wow, that's like 4 levels deep. Like
Yeah.
I thought my issues were, people pleasing, but it's like, well, no, no, no. What's the thing under the thing? As Steve Carter calls it. And so I think
Amen.
like um that book has been one that I return to. It helps that it's short, like that's one of
Yeah,
those
no, it
things,
does.
right?
It
But
does
like
help.
it's one of those things where, you chew on it and you go, okay, yeah, I need to hear that and I need to hear that again. And like that sentence or that chapter or that section, as I kind of move into different stages of life, continue to speak to me. I'm turning 40 here soon, and I'll probably read it again because I need to kind of consider what does that second half of life from his perspective look like. So
That's awesome. No, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, Nowin's one of the greats, that's for sure. It's no question. I always find it interesting because like so the church that I work at, denomination I've been part of now for a couple years, is the Mennonite Brethren, which no one knows what that is, and that's
I know
totally
what that is.
fine.
I love that. That's
Oh,
amazing.
nice, nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, no one I've talked to yet has had any idea what that is because we're small, but we're pretty. I like it a lot. But one of the cool things that attracted me to it was actually that some of the pastors that had recommended Now and had recommended similar books, I was like, oh, you guys aren't afraid of reading this, and that's really appreciated from me because I'm really enjoying that. So it was a pretty good olive branch to get me in, and now I love our denomination, happy to be part of it. But yeah, no, I love that. What is as you think through that book in particular, like how do you think your relationship has changed with that book over time? Like, are there things, like you said, there's things that you read differently or whatever, going through it, but any ways that you can think of that that's kind of affected you in particular?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate best teacher in life is the mistakes that you make. And you kind of don't understand, like when now it's talking about relevancy, right? Like the temptation towards being relevant. And you're like, I wouldn't have used that word, right? Like moving from relevance to prayer. And you're like, yeah, like, no, I'm not one of those pastors who wants to be cool or relevant or wants to be seen or known. Um, and then you realize, like, through the moments that you are stretched beyond your capacity and you're like tempted in a way that Jesus was, that like these things that you want to cling to or grasp, or like those moments where you feel like, oh no, like, is my worth on the line? And I think like Jesus himself being tempted in those ways, and like I think through failure, through learning the hard way, through I wish I would have done it this way, through wisdom of gained
Absolutely.
experience and the pain of what not to do. Like I think it's kind of made me go, oh yeah, that's what he meant. And I think um, that's one of the gifts. I think we have this kind of obsession in Christian culture with like the young upstart author, writer, the person who like there's some, it's kind of this weird amalgamation of our obsession with youth in American culture and like our kind of avoidance of death. And what Nowen does so well is prepare people to die. And so
Absolutely.
like his writing being from a place of like looking back in many ways, like he wrote plenty of books in his life, but like he's writing from a depth of regret. And I think that's what speaks to me most about that. Or the other book I brought, which is, I was going to share later, is one that I would probably recommend to all Christians, but The Inner Voice of Love, which is like
Yes. Yep.
his journal entries. And it's incredible, like the weird spiritual encounters I've even had with like certain phrases that he wrote in his own personal journal after a
Yes.
season of failure. And then years later, someone was like, you should publish that, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And it's, these like one page anecdotes where you're like so arrested by what he's sharing. And again, it's not from victory. It's not from youthful triumph or like having it when everybody else thinks that you're some rocket they need to follow because you got it. But rather from learning the hard way.
No, no, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things my friend Gavin was on last week, and we were talking about just the fact that churches don't have graveyards anymore is such an interesting. I honestly had not thought about that until he posed the question. He was like, "Does your church?" Because the church I'm at is 67 years old, and so we would be in that time frame that we totally could have a graveyard, but we don't. And so it was one of those conversations, and I was like, it really is crazy. It's a little difficult if you're in a city and you're trying to plant a church there and grow that. Like, you probably can't put a graveyard next to it in downtown Seattle. But it was such an interesting thought because I was like, yeah, honestly, you used to encounter death on your way into church every Sunday. And now it's kind of outside of town, behind a fence. I don't have to look at it unless I'm in that mindset to go there. And that's just I think something that we've lost as the church that it would be helpful to regain is just that consistent thought of mortality in general, because it's kind of a big piece of the Bible. So probably
Wow,
worth it.
turns out it's a prereq for the one thing we want, and
Exactly.
we spend most of our lives trying to avoid it. And
Amen.
yeah, it's a demon hiding in plain sight, frankly, the fear of death
Yes.
and avoidance of it. And, guilty as charged. I
No,
think
for sure.
a gift of going, okay, wait a minute, having ever present reminders that, we will return, that at one point Jesus said, like, we will be led, into that.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Except for once. But yes,
Exactly. Exactly. That one. Got him.
that one time. Yeah. Have you seen the guy? I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but there's a guy who's like, I think he's right around 50, and he like almost looks like he's like 20, 30 years old. He's been some billionaire guy spending all
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Oh my goodness. That whole thing. I preached a message when we were out in Utah.
Totally. I don't know if you've also seen the grief tech thing. So there's like
No, no.
a massive billions of dollar industry called grief tech, which is essentially through AI trying
Oh,
to
okay.
elongate and create realities that, again, there's like a compassionate part of me that's like, man, it would be amazing to sense the comfort or felt of a lost loved one through
Sure,
talking with
sure.
something that sounds like them. But like, not just cheating death. Like I just saw yesterday that book by that guy you're talking about, like, is surging as basically like death is a treatable disease and we can do everything we can to push it off. And it's like, yeah, to a point. And similarly, like part of accepting death is like the thing that builds our capacity for truly living. And
No, it's been an interesting one. Like, we're being Mennonite brethren, we're in a like a passivism, depends on who you talk to. I would refer to it as nonviolent. Some say passivism. It's Kansas, so others are like, I don't think about any of that stuff. But
tomato,
I
tomato.
was
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was faced with an interesting choice over the past couple months, because I serve as a chaplain here in our county, and so they require chaplains to carry a weapon when they go out on call to be insured. And we had a long conversation because they're like, "Hey, you're Mennonite. Like, are you okay with that?" And I was like, "Hey, here's the deal. Like, I can promise you with unequivocal certainty, I'm not using my weapon to protect me. Like, that's not going to happen. I have no idea. I don't want to carry it, but I have to. So, like, whatever. That's a different story. But for me, I was like, I'm comfortable with the fact I don't know what that'll look like for my wife and kids, but I'm comfortable with where I'm going. And there's an acceptance of that I find a lot of solace in, that I didn't have that in my kind of like evangelical SBC upbringing. Death was still kind of, even in church, something that we were all, you didn't talk about it, you didn't do that. And so it's been an interesting, my relationship with death has been changed a lot in the last 7 or 8 years, and I'm appreciative of it. But I think there's some biblical grounding for that, I would say, for sure. So I appreciate it, man. Is there a book? This is probably my favorite question I get to ask, if I'm honest. But is there a book that has completely flipped your perspective on faith, God, life, some aspect of ministry? Is there something that's kind of been that earth shattering one for you?
Man, it's such a great question. Couple come to mind, and I think some of them are like a down payment on something God is gonna teach you, and in the moment, like, the book itself, you're like, "I think I get this. I think this is it," and one of those, like, I brought was The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I remember just reading again, I was so new to my faith and was kinda told this is like a key book you're supposed to read, and I just read, at the time, 'cause I was, like, trying to get it. I read him talking about cheap grace versus costly
Mhm.
grace and this idea of like discipleship. Like, what does it mean to when Christ calls a person, he bids them to come and die? And little did I know, my kind of first spiritual father, who passed away a couple years ago,
Oh,
he like his kind of life magnus opus would be discipleship, and that he would have me come to his house with a group of guys, 12 of us every Thursday night, my senior year of college, and would
oh,
just
man.
learn about what does it mean to root our entire life in the person and work and power
Yep.
of Jesus? Like, what would it mean? And that was, for him, a guiding text because Dietrich like lived that. And it's so funny
Yeah.
that interesting to see the theme of our conversation. Um, Another form of that, and it's funny. One time it led to me um, getting my wife flowers from a Trader Joe's dumpster because
Yeah.
I thought I was being romantic, but I don't know how old you are, but everybody had their,
Yep.
Irresistible
Yep.
Revolution season. You're Mennonite, so that,
Yep.
like, means all
I
the
got
more.
it behind
Shane
me up here
Claiborne.
somewhere.
Like, this book, I was in college about the time that it came out, and Shane even came to our university and, was wearing his burlap clothes that he made and,
Yeah.
leading the Simple Way community in Philadelphia, but just that kind of, radically ordinary Christianity where it's like, wait a minute, Jesus meant this stuff, whether it's nonviolence or it's, caring for the poor and the marginalized or speaking up. And I think kind
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
gaining a prophetic imagination from Shane's quirky,
Yep.
like fun way of communicating and, have kind of idioms in my head that will always tether me to, as Paul said, remember the poor. Like I'll always have that check in my spirit of even in the apathy or the temptation of complacency, or even in our church as it grows, and I'm, say, more equipping the saints than always on the ground in every situation. They're on the front lines. Like, how do we not forget? And so, this old church that I'm sitting in right now, like, we do a Friday night community dinner for
Oh,
unhoused folks
awesome.
in our city. And
Yep.
in large part, it's because the grace of God to say, like, you can't like ever forget this. But it was like so radical at the time. I remembered all these different things that I was doing because I was like, well, Jesus cares about this. I remember friends dropping out of college because they're like, why should we have to pay for it? And like the mentors being like, you should probably learn like I love Shane, but you should probably learn, that it's okay to learn because he did too. And,
Yep.
but
Yep.
it was incredible for me back in those years, 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
At the time, so
No, I
and then
love
I think did you ask, you didn't ask me like a book that I come back to, right? You just kinda said what were some key ones, or was that
we yeah, what's a book that you come back to? I think
okay,
that
so
was
yeah,
a
because I think
couple
this
ago,
is
but that's perfect. I love
perfect.
it.
I wanna
Yep.
hit this one too. So, if you've
Yeah.
ever heard of Frederick Buechner, so he was like a contemporary at the time of like if you think about the same age as like Eugene Peterson and Nouwen and those, but this is a book, it's all like soggy because I dropped it in a pool on
Hey,
vacation
that
because it's like
happens.
a I know I mentioned coming back to the Nouwen book, but this is another one of those that felt like a paradigm shift for me, and really it wasn't like a new thought, but it was like a deep in my bones sort of thought, and he has this whole take on like it's a memoir, and I think I felt seen in my pain from some of my kind of father dynamic stuff, but he has this whole bit about like why we talk about our life and how like radically unimportant. Like nothing could be like less important, like what's another person, but then like at the same time, if we tell it right, someone else will recognize themselves in our story. And I think
Amen.
like for me, it's like, man, I really don't want to be self-important, but I also realize Jesus told parables and Jesus was like, this person who lives a life in this place, doing this thing, like, doesn't that speak to you? And that like other people like take permission and courage and feel loved and cared for when we share our stories and when we make space to kind of say to them like, hey, you're not alone in the world. And
Absolutely.
um, I think we mistake virality and the quantity of people who resonate with whatever it is that we have to say with the depth of, hey, what if this really helped a person? Um,
Mm,
what if sharing our story could really help somebody else feel like their story matters, and that transformation is possible in their story. And so, like, I think story is the language of the soul. I think it's the reason these books matter to us so much is it's like somebody else kind of says you're not crazy. You're not weird for thinking this or that like you don't know how to articulate it, but that thing you're feeling in your bones, like, hey, guess what? Like, I'm here with you in that, and Jesus is with you in that. And so
Amen.
that's one of those books where it's like, man, I didn't have the exact same situation as Frederick Buechner and his father and his life and his mother and their relationship and all those things, but man, I can relate to the struggles with codependency. And man, I can relate to the struggles with, believing you're not an imposter. Like I can
Mhm.
relate.
Absolutely. No, no, I appreciate that. One of the things about story that's been so funny to me was like uh growing up in the particular area and denomination and such that I did. There's a lot of pushback for a long time against like anything that smelled like seeker sensitive churches because it was my dad listens to the podcast and is going to love that I refer to him as a 20-point Calvinist again, but it's true. So very reformed upbringing, and that's fine. There's pieces that I resonate with, but not all of it anymore. But with that being said, like I grew up with like, oh man, the pastors wearing skinny jeans, there's LED lights or whatever, colored lights on the stage, a fog machine. There's no way that that's Christian. Like that seeker sensitive vibe is bad. And I didn't feel that, but I heard that from a lot of people growing up. And one of the weirdest things that I've noticed in the last probably 10 or 15 years has been the reality that a lot of those churches that I grew up around have pushed so hard against story and sharing our own personal experiences because it's not the Bible, which is totally fair. I'll give them that. Like, it's not as important as God's word. I don't want to be misheard on that. But at the same time, I'm like, guys, like when Jesus spoke, he uses the Old Testament, of course, yes, like absolutely, that is the basis and foundation. But he's telling parables, he's telling stories, and for us, they might seem a little like out of place, but for the original hearers, the original listeners, this was like him standing up and being like, "Hey, so like Jeff who works down at the hardware store
Totally.
goes like it was relevant at the time. Like he was doing exactly what on my best day I hope I'm attempting to do. Like and so it's been interesting to see that. I'm forever grateful for the storytellers because I don't think I don't know where we'd be without him, and Jesus in my opinion was the best. So
Yeah.
let's imitate
Oh,
that,
it's
continue.
it's so helpful. The irony of like we tend to lionize or, idolize our preference. And I
Sure,
think
sure.
what's so funny, we had a church foundations class a few weeks back and someone was just like, "Hey, do you preach life to Bible or Bible to life?" And it was like, "Yes."
Yep, yep,
And it wasn't because like we figured it out. Methods change,
sure.
audiences change, and I think that matters. But it is really funny because you can very much make a case for Jesus taught in some ways exegetically, not really in the way that we like think about it. Like, he wasn't like, open your Bibles, but he did say, check out the scroll of Isaiah, and this is my mission statement. And he's like, unpacking what you see here is this. And he's like, exactly what you said. Like, there's a guy, or there's a coin, or do you see
Yep,
those birds?
yep.
Like, and it's just so weird, like the spiritual discernment and also the like different audiences need different things, you know,
Absolutely.
and I love that. And I love that, you're not going to teach children the same way you're going to teach an adult Bible study.
Yep,
You're going to
yep.
intentionally speak different languages to different folks. And I just think I had this encounter with the Lord at this prayer thing where this young man came up and he was just so faithfully trying to like speak life over me. And I don't remember 89% of what he said,
Yeah.
5%. But a phrase that arrested me, it was like he found the phrase. So it was like all of the teaching of what he was trying to kind of pray or prophesy over me didn't land until he said, there's always more in the Holy
One
Spirit,
thing. Yep,
always more. And so it like hit me in the way of like, man, like we have to stop reducing God's capacity to teach us, whether it's through books or it's through, all the different ways Christ is playing in 10,000 places, as Eugene would say. Um, Eugene Peterson, that is. So anyway, yeah, I resonate with that.
No, no, I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and Eugene Peterson he had a quote, or I put his quote in the intro video to this podcast. I just changed it this week. But you still one of my top 5 favorite authors. So always a good one. So when you think of, and you kind of answered this a little bit with the last book as well, but I'm wondering if there's anything else maybe that's in there as well. But is there a book, is there an author that's kind of given you words to something that you've always felt, but maybe didn't have that phrasing or that ideology before you read it, and then it kind of like was that aha moment? Is there anything like that for you? Absolutely. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'm reading about, you know, 20-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old Eugene doing a paper route and like talking about the streets of Montana in the early hours and how God spoke to him through it. And by the end of that book, I was like, yeah, like I'm a pastor like this. Like this is
Yep.
my wiring.
Yep.
This is what he's talking about. Like that's me. And it was like almost this constellation of things. Um, that later like kind of the whole phrase of that book is like everyday becoming. And I felt like, yeah, that is what I am. I'm someone who bared a bunch of elements like a shepherd would have in, the olden times,
Yep.
as my
Yep.
kids call it. And
Yeah.
I, as a result, God built some grit into me to help be with people in the mess, step in,
Amen.
the
Yep.
mess to be with them in it. I brought another book that I love that's a really recent book, and it's by a friend who is just incredible. But this book, The Gift of Thorns by AJ Swoboda, he has this really radical capacity to be almost too honest.
Yep.
So you're
Yep.
like, wait a minute, like you're not supposed to say that in like the Christian publishing. Like you're not supposed to say that, but like the amount of times that like this leading with a limp, as Dan Allender calls it, this like part of me that feels like I'm arms wide between the world I inherited and like some of the generational curse and then like the generational blessing I'm trying to give to my children. I feel like stretched between two worlds, like trying to put an end to something and trying to begin something. And many ways that I've, not just resonated with the Apostle Paul and like the God I've asked, like, I don't want to feel this anymore. I don't want to feel this pain. And then AJ was like, oh, crazy. Why don't I write a book about the thorns that God won't remove? Ugh,
Amen.
like, why you gotta be like that? And then to name his own issues, his own disappointments, like, how do you wrestle with disappointment? How do you accept it? Um, was one of those that spoke and put words again to not just the positive side, like say The Pastor by Eugene, where I felt inspired, but to the pain and to the presence
Absolutely.
of God in the midst of it, and that there might be like some mystery there, and that God intentionally is doing things to develop us that shape and mold us beyond uh, our own sufficiency, where His grace is truly sufficient for us, as the passage says. And so, yeah, that's one of those books that I'm like, yep, I I think you're articulating some of my felt need and making me feel less alone in the world. And I'm
Amen.
just thankful for AJ. I appreciate that.
Yes. Yeah, I think I read that when we were out on vacation a year ago or so out in Idaho. We're out in the mountains. My in-laws live out there, and beautiful place, and I'm reading that book and I was like, "Oh my goodness." I like what you said, like I can't believe you said this in a book that's being published in a, like, I'm glad, I'm grateful, but like not everybody does that. I appreciate that. He's an incredible guy. Yeah, absolutely. One of the one of the things that I just think is consistently so interesting. Have you read the letters to a young pastor, Eugene Peterson and his son?
So I haven't, and I've
No,
heard
no, it's
great
okay.
things.
Yeah, it is one of those books, and I you would probably like it. It's similar to Now and where it's like, okay, here's this thing that you weren't really supposed to read, and I've mentioned it on an episode prior, but that is one of my favorites for that exact purpose. Is like he's at that point retiring, or I guess it starts while he's still working in ministry, but he's in Baltimore at that point in a fairly, while being the East Coast, but fairly decently similar context to a West Coast city or whatever else, a lot of like doubt and faith and all of that. And reading his letters, his emails back and forth between his son, there were so many times where I was like, oh man, like you are unequivocally not supposed to put that in a book. Like, I don't know. I don't even know if he wanted it published. I mean, he had, I think he had passed by the time that was published. I could be wrong. But there were some things I was like, I don't think you can complain about like Becky in your church. They changed names or whatever, but there was some
Exactly.
stuff left. I was like, man,
Yeah.
I don't think you could do that. But I appreciate it. Pastorally reading it, that was one of the most foundational. I mean, that and Contemplative Pastor changed so much for me. But I love that. I think that's super, super important to get into. And kind of the follow up to that one was just kind of like how do those perspectives, those changes, like how has that deepened or challenged your own faith? I think you answered that a little bit, but some of that, like you said, it's a guy writing about streets in a state that's very different from yours. So like, how does that challenge those pieces, or how have you grown through that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think like it's a really great question. The first thing that comes to mind is later in that book, Eugene's son, there's this interaction that they have. So it's fun that you talked about the book that he eventually published, where he's at the retirement of his dad. And, Eugene has this moment where he's like, okay, son, what did you think of my retirement sermon? And he's like, I've heard that same sermon for the last 30 years.
Yep.
Like, I think like what's strangely profound is how unimportant and important we are at the same time. Like,
Amen.
I often wrestle and battle with like, man, this doesn't feel novel to me or new to me, so it probably is irrelevant for other people. And yet, like, we're in this business of nothing new being under the sun. And how do we take the timeless things? So, like, I noticed the books that I picked out, a lot of them are people who are dead. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm not, the only read the dead people guy. I'm not that
Sure,
guy.
sure.
I love, I am on the front lines, cutting edge. I didn't realize I was an early adopter until recently, when it comes to things, but I am, like, I really enjoy novelty, and yet at the same time, I think we just need, things that are timeless in structure and
Amen.
thought. In fact, like, I brought a book that another one that I thought, like, you kind of I think you wanna ask it, but, what are books that you would kind of feel like Christians need to read? And one of those, like Andy Crouch, a lot of people love Andy, but he wrote this book that, like, this little book that I think kind of gets lost in the fray of his voice in the technological moment and in entrepreneurialism. But he has this kind of 2x2 frame. And if you want to get me, like, give me a 2x2, like, give me a grid, that looks like that, and I'm all over it.
Yes. Yep.
But
Yep.
basically, he talks about flourishing as like this collision between like high authority and high vulnerability. And I think for me, that's one of those sticking thoughts of no matter where you are, no matter what role you have, like we all have this spiritual authority from God and this responsibility, this kind of dominion, as Genesis 1 would say, in like a healthy way. And we're also like the most vulnerable thing ever, meaning
Literally,
that
yeah.
we die not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. We're so at risk in ways that other creatures aren't, and how God is calling us to flourishing by having both of those. And I feel like, what I wish everybody could know is that like a lot of books are like all flourish or all authority, like just take your authority. And a lot of books are all vulnerability. Like shout out to Brene, we love her, but like,
Yep.
um, it's that collision of do we realize the reality of our vulnerability and our dependency, and at the same time, the importance of us operating as quote more than conquerors in Christ, like as those who the one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world. And
Amen.
just us needing that, needing to take full advantage of realizing the capacity we have as we are one with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and realizing that we cannot do anything apart from that. And so I just really like hold on to that as one that I would even say is a thought that a lot of these books speak to my soul is they either remind me, hey, you forgot that you have this authority. You forgot what God has put you here to do and with your one precious life, Mary Oliver, like this one life that God has given you. And you need Jesus deeply
Amen.
and
Amen.
you cannot do it apart from him. So,
No,
because I
absolutely.
it's easy to stray to one end or the other, right? It's easy to lose sight. And
Yes.
I'm really thankful. Authors kind of bring me back into view. They're like, hey, look, remember who
Yep.
you are. Kind of
Yep.
like Captain Hook, like that scene in the movie Hook where it's like, Peter, there
Yes.
you are,
There
like I think I need a lost boy, I need an author to be like, no, that's you, son of God,
Absolutely.
child of God, um,
Amen.
well loved, uh, with whom he is well pleased. Now get out there.
Yep.
So
No, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I always think it's funny. My kids, you mentioned the olden days earlier from your kids. My kids refer to the olden days as like the 90s. My son asked me the other day, he was like, so did they have phones when you were a kid? I was like, well, what do you mean? Because I mean, like, an iPhone, no, but we did have telephones. We could talk to people, and you're just mind blown by the idea of a corded phone or a rotary dial. Oh my
my
goodness.
11-year-old the other day just said to me, "Oh, Dad, back in the olden days when there was a cord on the phone," and I went, "Okay, apparently that's the symbol." Like, all
Yeah.
right, the old corded phone. Yeah,
Yep, that's the one. I had to explain to my daughter, she's 6, my oldest is 8, and I had to explain to them what a bag phone was, and they were like, "Well, why wouldn't you just use a cell phone?" I was like, "'Cause they didn't exist, guys. Like that's not it." But I think it's funny. I used a reference from oh goodness, the David Bowie movie. What was that movie? Strange one. My
I know what
goodness.
you're talking about, but I can't
I
remember the
had it.
title. I know. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, had it on the tip of my tongue, but I used a reference from that similar to Hook or anything from a similar time period, and my kids were like, "So the olden, like a old movie, like old days?" And I was like, "No, no, no, I guess, yes, for you, but
back before we had color television in the 90s.
yeah, it's like not to me." But sorry, I had to derail that for a second because that one's too fun. But yeah, no, I think in those books that I always love asking, like, what are the ones that you would want to hand to Christians? Because I've been asked, I don't know how many times, but plenty of times, like, what's the books that you wish everyone could read in the world? I'm like, well, hesitantly, and I don't mean that in any bad way, but like the Bible is the one I wish everybody would read. So like we got to go there. Sure, sure. Now I still am like, hopefully they're in community, they've got people, there's a lot of thoughts there, but whatever. But when you're talking about Christians, still probably the Bible, because that's the one that doesn't get read as often as it needs to. But like past that, I'm like, what do Christians need to read? And so the second part of that, because you kind of got that, maybe you've got other ones too, and you're welcome to share those as well. But I'm interested. What's the conversation that you would hope that reading those books, the two that you've mentioned or any others, what's the conversation you would hope that would start in the church? I think you got into that a little bit, but what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's such a great question because we're in like I think an age of disclosure. So I think
Yes.
there's almost this weird moment where people do overshare, like, and it's almost like a new form of invulnerability, right? It's like we are really self-important. I think what I like about those books is it grounds our personal experience in a felt compassionate way, but then doesn't say like that's just the way things are. It
Yeah.
says like similar, like the point of my podcast, like I joke about it, but is like Jesus said, but you've heard it said, and then he says, but I tell you. And I'm interviewing leaders saying, hey, tell me what you learned in your own formation journey. And so, really, the discovery there is that most of us have this construction phase where we are told this is how it is. And then we really all of us, right? Whether it's through the church or it's through the world, and then you hit this point where you have to deconstruct that to some degree. And I think we think of that as a bad word, but it's really a necessary part of spiritual formation. And so I think what they do a great job of is saying, "Hey, I see you, that your construction was inadequate to a certain degree because something was missing. You heard it said." And
Absolutely.
then there's this moment of like deconstructing away the dross or the things that the barnacles on the boat that need to be chipped off. That then from there, if we're willing to stick with it, Jesus can reconstruct this beautiful faith
Amen.
it's even deeper and more real. And so that's what I get excited about those books is it's like, hey, I see you in your pain, but it's not just a place to live forever. Your felt experience is part of the story, it's not the whole story. And there's this greater story that we're all invited to. And so I think that's like, for me, I gain personal perspective where I feel stuck. And then I want other Christians to be like, hey, listen, take a minute and be met in your pain, but see that Jesus pulls you beyond it. Um, and so I find that to be beautiful.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is. And that leads me into I've got two pretty quick questions about the podcast, but like I said at the beginning, you have your own podcast, but I tell you, it's great. I like I said already, encourage listeners to check that out as well. But one of the main themes to me that comes out of the podcast, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that I get out of it has been kind of that conversation of like, hey, there are these elements of things that we have built up often in that question of what have you been taught that's changed? Like these things that have been built up that we have to take down or they've fallen down and now we've reconstructed something. What is that for you? And so for me, the question I had was just kind of like you came to faith later on, or at least in high school, which isn't late, but like later on. So like for you, did you have a deconstruction or those pieces of things in your life, or was it just a little different?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think I've had a couple moments. The first one was hilarious because I went to a Christian college and I didn't know those existed until halfway
Sure,
through my
sure.
senior year at high school because I become a Christian. And of course, the girl that introduced me to Young Life is the same girl that goes off to a Christian college in Seattle. I
Yeah,
get the first sense from God I'm supposed to be at this place after sitting in a class. I'm supposed to be in Seattle. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. I show up and I'm in these Bible classes and it's all new to me. And everybody around me is freaking out because the teachers are pushing back against kind of like a cursory or maybe shallow learning that they had about the scriptures growing up. And I'm like, this is
sure.
amazing. Like, this is
Yeah,
crazy. This
yep.
thing is so deep. I have no idea. But I had to deconstruct so much of the world out of me. Like, God had to chip away at so many like primal assumptions that were survivalist and still does to this day, things that kind of from an insecure uh, attachment environment growing up. And then, like, I think the other one, and there's so many people who've said this in so many better ways, but I think suffering is inevitable and is one of God's greatest teachers in our life. And this last year of my life has been met with a lot of suffering. And so I've experienced really crazy things. Like I witnessed a suicide in the church building that we were in. Someone who happened to be here and who shot themselves. And I did go through the trauma of that. And have gone through some familial disappointment and unhealth and things that I can't control and, you know, loss of relationships and changes and hard leadership decisions. And in that, there have been moments where I've really wrestled with God and really battled. Like, "Yo, where were you? Like, what what happened there?" Like, "I thought you were gonna be there in a certain way, like, my pain, what's going on?" And so, the grace of God is, He provides people to help heal the wounds that you experience from people and otherwise, and,
Absolutely.
the very things that cause the insecure attachment are the very things that can heal it, and I'm thankful for that.
Amen.
Moments of, prophetic words, moments of generosity, moments of friendship, moments of care, moments of, faithfulness where people have showed up where they haven't in the past. Like
Yeah.
have really meant the world. And so I think it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we suffer and how God meets us in that. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear, if we're open to it, even when we're mad and have to
Yeah.
tell him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, that is, it was just interesting to me having listened to the podcast and then heard your story a little bit. I was like, man, like it's when you, I don't mean that in any bad way, but like when you're coming to it in high school, for me, I was deconstructing so many things that I had from like 5 and 10 years old. So I would have been the kid in the Bible class who was like,
Of course.
what? Like, you're
Of
saying
course.
what? Like,
Yes.
so it's just an interesting one for me because as I listened to your show, I'm like, man, I hear that heart for that. And I was wondering where that was coming from. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And then the last book question I've got for you, because I was going to ask a different one about the podcast, but I think you answered that perfectly. So I'll leave that one there and encourage people, go check that out. But the last book question I got for you is, are there any books that you are reading right now that you're excited about? And what are they, if you want to share them with us?
Perfect. Of course. Yes. So I'm reading this book called Landscapes of the Soul.
Okay.
And
Yep.
you probably heard me drip out some of this language, but it's basically like talking about how Jesus has called us to both independence and intimacy. And the traps that we fall into are the kind of traditional insecure attachments of either what's called like avoidance, where it's kind of like I'm going to be an island to myself or a desert, as the book calls it, or um, what is called like preoccupied or anxious attachment and the kind of idea of growing up in a jungle, um, or like a disorganized attachment pattern versus like how do we find security in Jesus's attachment to the Father and the Spirit, as well as how we are made for that independence and intimacy? Like Jesus calls us to himself and then he sends us out, and he calls us and sends us out. And so that's been really beautiful. It's by this husband and wife who are like a therapist as well as a
Oh,
professor,
that's
as well as, or sorry, spiritual director and a professor, as well as been pastors for like 20 years. Um, Another book that I'm reading, this is a really fun one. For those of you in the TikTok world, this book is by this guy who I kept seeing clips from. And basically, he's like a fourth generation trial lawyer. And
okay. Okay.
he has all these pointers that you're like, it sounds really fascinating. But basically, like when you're in an argument, you just speed up. And when you're frustrated, like every self protective mechanism just floods within you, and then it's like you just tank your conversations. And he has like, you know, just been formed in an environment that is like very selective about when to speak, when not to speak. And he
Yeah.
loves Jesus, and it's really fascinating. Like he talks about all these little things that feel very hyper practical, but you're like, oh yeah, I if I would have done that, like I could have saved, you know, thousands of hours of regret and bad decision making and, flooded conversations and apologies and like, so it's really, really fascinating because he was basically
Yeah.
making these videos in his truck and then people really resonated and a publisher called and was like, hey, can you
Want
distill
to
this?
do this?
And,
Yeah.
all of our dream as, authors like you or aspiring authors like me. But I think that it's really beautiful to be given and gifted tools. And then one book I'm not currently reading, but just came to mind is one that I really am grateful for. So I'm turning 40 next week. So this is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
probably my own passion project. And there's, so many different versions of this. There's the David Brooks Two Mountains. There's the
Yep.
Richard Rohr book, whatever,
Yep.
Falling Upward. There's the book that I loved that I read on my sabbatical that's like deeply shaped my life a couple years ago that I will probably keep coming back to is the book Strength to Strength by Arthur
Okay.
Brooks,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
very much about like first half of life, second half of life. And so that's kind of one of my weird fixations as someone
Oh,
who
no.
is probably, I'm already past the statistical middle age. But, I just continue to think about how do I finish well and how do I give my life away and how do I move from fluid young man church planter, scrappy energy that I no longer have, to a more, what they
Amen.
call it, crystallized intelligence. Like, how do I
Yep.
give away what I've been learning?
Yeah.
And man, it's really hard to
Yep.
move and make that shift, but I'm really that's kind of my passion project right now. So
Well, that's
that's
awesome.
something I would encourage people to read that I have been reading or has been reading me really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. No, thank you. Yeah, no, I find myself in a weird spot because I am younger than most people assume I am. But we started life like got married at when I was 18 and had kids early and all of that. And so I'm at this spot where I'm like, man, like I think I'm supposed to still have the energy for like planting and ambitious ideas and exciting things. And I'm more like I'm at this spot where I'm like, man, I got kids and I'm trying to figure out how do I raise them and not have them. I don't know if you're familiar with probably, but Abraham Piper, John Piper's son, has a he's an atheist, I think maybe agnostic. But his whole encounter with his words were similar to others, but like he felt like his dad would never cheat on his mother, John Piper, but that he had made the church his other woman effectively. And now that I'm in a spot where I'm like I could really easily make this my whole life, but I've got kids that are looking for me to be there in these things. And so kind of in a second half of life, even though I guess now I'm probably closer to it, but but still like in that younger spot, I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't feel it. I feel like I'm about 10 years older than I am, and that
yeah,
works. So it's all
100%.
right.
100%. Yeah, I think
Yep.
the age of your children quite dictates that your season of life. And so
Yeah. No, it's
that's
feeling
man,
like it.
that is an incredible punchline to the reality of that, man. Like you know, no more sobering thought than looking back and going, I wish, so I hear you. It's a good word.
Oh, I'm trying, that's for sure. But I thank you so much for being on here. I want to honor your time and all, but I just kind of was wondering, is there anywhere that people can connect with you? Anything you want to direct people towards at the end here that they can follow up with you on?
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on, social media. I'm on Instagram at Tyler Gorsline, Substack, Tyler Gorsline. I love to write and share stuff from the podcast there. You can find our But I Tell You podcast. And then if, like speaking and other things, I just go to tylergorsline.com. And I just love to connect if I can be of help or in service to your people or be an encouragement. So thank you so much for having
Absolutely.
me, man. I really
Yeah, of
appreciate it.
course. Of course. Thank you for hopping on here, man. I appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back on when you do write your book. I know it's coming one of these days. So we'll have you on again. But I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right.